Okay, we are now recording, so I want to make sure that we have all of the stuff ready to go. Okay, there is a, in the chat bubble that you will find in your navigation bar for Zoom, there is a link to a handout. So hopefully you can get all of that. And I will be accepting questions via the chat link, and also after the program presentation part is over, then we can unmute and have verbal questions. But, well, my name is Charity Rouse. I am the Director of Local History for the Spartanburg County Public Library System. I've been here in Spartanburg, South Carolina since June of 2014. And this last year has been a little bit of an adventure as we have ended up migrating things online. So glad that you are joining us, whether you are local to Spartanburg or from around the state or around the country. So thank you for being here tonight. And this is our first in the 2021 genealogy series of once a month. Dives into different types of records, different types of genealogy research. So tonight we're going to be talking about vital records, finding and using them, and what you might be able to see with the vital records. When I say vital records, what I'm really talking about are 4 primary sets of records: birth, marriage, divorce, and death. The records of adoption are also vital records, but they kind of fall into a class of their own and are a little bit different, but because they relate to particularly the birth records, I do want to touch on those just a little bit. So what exactly is in a vital record? They are the official state or national, depending on where you are, certificate verifying a life event. In the US, they generally date from the early part of the 20th century to the present, although there are exceptions. New England kept city, county, township records much earlier on. And you may find New England records going back into the 1800s, 1700s, and even some of the 1600s. So in some parts of the country, you may find earlier records. But generally speaking, here in the South, these post-date 1900. Legal record, it's recording of the birth, the marriage, the death, divorce, again, or adoption. They are public records, but there are privacy restrictions which may limit access. And these privacy restrictions are going to differ state to state, time period to time period. So you may or may not be able to get the information that you're looking for online, or particularly easily, depending on what you're looking for. So, again, most states started the statewide reporting of life events in the early portion of the 20th century. South Carolina began statewide reporting in 1911 for marriages, which obviously I left out of that sentence, sorry about that. And births and deaths began in 1915. Divorce was not legal in South Carolina until it was passed by the legislature in 1949 and became a legal event in South Carolina in 1950. Now, adoption records must be requested from the court which handled the adoption. These are typically closed records, and only certain people can request those records. South Carolina is, I'm told, one of the trickier states to get information out of for adoptions. However, you may be able to get an amended birth certificate that has the adoptive parents' names from DHEC. Again, that would be dependent on the right person making the request. So the adoptee, the parents of the adoptee, maybe the children of the adoptee. So where do you look for vital records? Well, you contact the Vital Records Office in the state where the event happened. So if someone was married in the state of Virginia, you don't contact where they lived in Georgia for that record. You contact where they lived, where the event happened. Were they born in Virginia? Were they born in New York? Were they married in New York? Wherever the event happened. You may find that there's a state-sponsored website, like the Secretary of State in Missouri has a website that has a lot of the older vital records available on it, and we'll look at one of those in a little bit. And then places like Ancestry.com or Ancestry Library Edition. FamilySearch.org has partnered with a number of states as well. Now, some states do partner with Vital Check or other services to provide rush services or credit card services. So you may or may not have to put your credit card or your check in the mail and mail something into the state, but do look at those fairly carefully, because often you're paying a convenience fee of $20, $25, $30, and you still have to submit your ID information. So it may allow you to pay by credit card, but you're paying an awful lot for that service. So you may be paying $45 for a $12 certificate, and all but $12 of that goes to the third party who's doing that service. So in most cases, it is just much easier for genealogy purposes to contact the state office itself and do the paperwork directly with the state office. You may find that you can deal with a county office in states like New York or New Jersey. Dealing with the county where the event happened in that clerk of court may very well be faster, easier, and sometimes cheaper than dealing with the state office. So you may want to do some research into how to request these certificates from whichever state it is. So since we're in South Carolina, we're going to talk about South Carolina records for the most part. The Department of Health and Environmental Control, DHEC. Yeah, that's exactly where I thought that it would be, yeah, vital records. Tip for doing vital records research: Google is your friend. Type whatever the name of the state is, so South Carolina, vital records, find the resources, see what comes up, get through all of the paid ones, and find the one that is a .gov, .gov, and then you will find the links to the appropriate department. Sometimes it's the Department of Vital Records, sometimes it's the Department of Health and Environmental Control, so, or various other names. Every state calls it something slightly different. We are the US and we do tend to be independent. So just know that you may find different things. When I went to the DHEC website today and clicked on the Vital Records page, all of a sudden, I saw this new thing on their webpage that says, effective July 1, 2019, Section 4463-140 of the South Carolina Code was amended to allow adult adoptees age 18 or older who were born in South Carolina to obtain a copy of the adoptee's original birth certificate, etc. Then you get to the thing in bold at the end. This law applies to adoptions finalized after July 1st, 2019, which means those people may have to wait until they are adults, because most of those are probably children or small children, babies. But there's at least a little bit of hope for some adoptees in South Carolina. There are also adoptee facts and biological parent facts that you can go if you are looking at adoptive records. So if you scroll on down that page, you get to the guidance and documents section. And so the ones we're generally interested in are going to be the death indexes for genealogy, or the obtaining, marriage certificate, those types of things. And the vital records forms and the fees and costs will tell you how to do the application in South Carolina if it's something that you need to request directly from the Department of Health and Environmental Control. Each record is a $12 fee to get that record, and you will be required to provide proof of identification for yourself. So, but beyond DHEC in South Carolina, there are some other places you can find vital records. So, our Kennedy room at the library has the South Carolina death certificates on microfilm for 1915 when they started statewide to 1969. It is a rolling 50-year privacy restriction. And so when we get to 2021 in January, I'll be placing a microfilm order in the spring for those 1970 death certificates. Now, locally, the city of Spartanburg did maintain some limited birth and death registers, and you see the dates there. These are very limited and for a very small piece of territory. It is not Spartanburg County. It is what was within the city limits during that time frame, which is slightly smaller than what it is now. And a lot of what we think of as being in the city of Spartanburg right now is not. Most of Hillbrook, my neighborhood, is not in the city, and it is lot by lot. Because I'm in the county, my next door neighbor's in the city. It's all sorts of fun at the voting precinct, let me tell you. But some of these do survive. So you may find that in some periods prior to South Carolina having statewide birth, marriage, and death certificates, and well, divorce is its own thing in South Carolina, but those may be recorded in other places. City of Charleston has a long record of marriage and birth and death registers. So if someone was fortunate enough to live in Charleston, you might have better records than someone who lived here in the upstate. So some things are going to depend location by location. Ancestry.com has quite a few collections, and to get to this, I went to search at the top of Ancestry Library Edition. It works on Ancestry.com as well, and I chose card catalog. And then I typed in South Carolina in the title, and then births in the keyword. And it pulled up 23 different record sets, some of which don't actually have to do with births because marriages popped up and deaths popped up too. So you may want to do a couple of different searches for the area that you are looking at. Some of them were county level record sets. Some of them were statewide record sets. So South Carolina delayed birth records 1766 to 1900, and then the city of Charleston, South Carolina birth records 1877 to 1901. You may not find comprehensive between those dates, but they do have records between those dates. There was a compiled marriage index between 1641 and 1965, so there are different record sets. If you are dependent only on Ancestry's little shaky leaves to pop up in your personal research tree, you need to get away from that a little bit because they are the shaky leaves are only in a small portion of Ancestry's vast database. And so sometimes the record set that you need is on Ancestry, the database is there, the images are there, and it's not showing up because you haven't done an actual search. And so do search within some of these record sets if you know you are specifically looking for a birth or a marriage. I was able to find a marriage on Ancestry for my great aunt and uncle from Virginia, who my mother knew that they had come to South Carolina in the 60s to get married. And she had the wrong county. She thought they went to south of the border over in Dillon County. And turns out they drove straight down whichever road it was that came from Central Virginia down across North Carolina into South Carolina and stopped at the first courthouse in South Carolina. Fortunately, it wasn't Spartanburg County. That particular county has digitized and put the marriage registers for that time frame in Ancestry. And so I was able to find that marriage. So I can't show it to you because my great aunt's still alive. So, but you may find things in places that you aren't expecting to find. Spartanburg, unfortunately, the marriages are not online anywhere. They're at the courthouse, and yeah, it's frustrating because they do not do any distance research. You have to show up and pay your $5 to get the marriage information. And I don't know what their restrictions are currently with COVID. So what do some of these records look like? Well, another place that you're gonna wanna look for South Carolina records is at the South Carolina Department of Archives and History, which is scdah.org. or .gov. And they have, because South Carolina, I mentioned earlier, the deaths are on a 50-year release, births are on a 100-year release. So births are private for 100 years. And so in 2015, really 2016, when they released the 1915, they chose not to microfilm the births. And I dread the day when they decide that the deaths aren't going to be microfilmed either. Because this interface is not a very good interface, but it's better than not having access to the items. So on the South Carolina Electronic Records Archive, SCERA, S-C-E-R-A, they have search interfaces for the 1915 birth certificates, the 1916 birth certificates, the 1917, and I think 18 is on there now. And so you have to do some digging for it, but hey, they're there. And I happened to pull up one from 1915. This is a Rouse, but it's not my family that I'm aware of. And it is for a Henry Franklin Rouse in Florence, South Carolina, 1915. And there are some amendments on here. One thing to remember, always check the back of the document, because sometimes you find treasures. There were some corrections on that front. See how Florence, South Carolina was corrected for the fathers, and Florence was corrected for the mom. South Carolina was added. And we do know that Mac Rouse, the father, was the person giving the information for the certificate of birth, which meant it probably happened at home. And so we get this affidavit that two different people had to show up in court to attest to the fact that Henry Franklin Rouse was born in Florence in July 1915. So if you are not born in a hospital, that kind of thing, or there's no doctor in attendance, you may have to have an affidavit that kind of proves the birth. Depends on the place, but always look for that second page, because it can be the treasure trove, because we know 2 different people who were attesting to that birth. So we know who maybe neighbors were, who the midwife might have been. Take a little more research on that. For marriage records in South Carolina, you may find actual certificates, or you may find registers. So in the courthouse, they would get the loose paper back in, and they would record it in this register. So this counts as being an official document because it is an official court record. You may find the loose papers as well, and I'll show you an example in a minute. But this happens to be from Allendale County in 1937. It's part of the R's, and it tells you the name of the man and his residence, the name of the woman, age and color, name of the woman, her residence, age and color, and the date of issue. So when was the license issued to them, and when was the date of the marriage and the date that it was returned. So this is the working ledger that they are tracking. You see on the 3rd line, there is a license that's taken out, but it was never sent back into the court to say when the marriage happened, and it wasn't returned. So we don't know whether that marriage happened and the paperwork got lost, or just not filed, or got filed in a different county. Wasn't supposed to be, but weird things happen. Or maybe that marriage didn't happen. So that would be something to look at a little bit more along the way. Sometimes you do find the loose certificates. These would be the minister's returns. So it has the application information of the people. This is a different Rouse, again, not a known relative, but could be maybe. Willie Rouse, and it may be Medgars instead of Wedgers, I don't know. I'm pretty good at reading bad handwriting, but sometimes it gets beyond you. But this was the marriage license returned by the notary public, in this case, who performed the marriage, and you get their signatures there. And so again, look for both pages, because on a marriage license, you're going to have a front and a back. Or you're going to have 2 pages where there is information that the clergy person or judge or officiant is going to have to fill in. So you will get more information on that. And that's from 1940 in Edgefield County. South Carolina death certificates, again, started in 1915. And this is one from 1918. This is my great-great-grandfather. John J. Rouse, and you will see there was a lot of scratch outs, and I don't know whether it's because his daughter was giving bad information or because the clerk wasn't just paying attention and things got smeared. But name of father, from other documents, I know that should be Robert A. Rouse. Chesterfield, South Carolina is maybe correct. I've always seen Darlington County for him. They're not that far away from each other. And then Elizabeth McDaniel in Darlington. And so you get cause of death, date of birth. And that may have been she was giving the wrong information when asked for date of birth. Sometimes you see an informant who gives their own date of birth instead of the date of birth of the decedent. So remember, death certificate, other than the actual right-hand side where you're looking at the cause of death and the date of death, Although that's the time of death when it's certified. So if somebody dies overnight, it could be a day off from the actual event. Just all depends. And then you do get a place of burial or removal and who the undertaker is. So you get some more information about where you might want to look further. Just like you might want to look further about who was a minister who married someone. That can be helpful because it can tell you denomination and church. This happens to be a Virginia divorce because, to the best of what I could find, I couldn't find any South Carolina divorce records online yet. And I may have just been looking in the wrong place. But this is a Virginia one. And this is 1918, number 1, which is when Virginia started keeping statewide divorce records. Divorce was legal in Virginia before that, and was able, you could have it, but you had to look and research on the county level for that information rather than the state. This happens to be the first divorce record in 1918 when it was statewide. So you can find some information. He's claiming she deserted him. So there's more to that story. Not my family, but it does make for interesting research sometimes. In Virginia, just as a contrast to South Carolina, so South Carolina, births records are private for 100 years, death records are private for 50 years, marriage and divorce are available from the courthouse the day after they're filed or made official, decreed in the case of the divorce. In Virginia, the records for marriage, divorce, and death become public record and available widely publicly after 25 years, and births again after 100 years. So every state is going to be slightly different. North Carolina has 20th century birth registers on the county level that have been digitized and are out there well into the 20th century, so well beyond that 100-year restriction. So some states, you can get birth registers up through, the 1900s, and some states you can't get them. So it just depends. Virginia does have indexing on Ancestry through 2014. So it doesn't tell you a whole lot, but you may be, if you know exactly who you're looking for, you may be able to find some information there. The state of Virginia in 2014, or I guess they were released in 2015, partnered with Ancestry to do the scanning and digitization. And it's a contract with the state of Virginia. We'll see how long they leave it up, or whether they do like Missouri did and get everything digitized, and then after the 5-year contract or whatever it is with Ancestry, they pull it into a Virginia Vital Records or a Virginia collection. I don't know. But just as a reminder, just because you found it online today in Ancestry or wherever, doesn't mean it's going to be there tomorrow. Save a copy of the record and cite your source. Tell where you found it, because otherwise you may not have good luck trying to replicate your search. So there are some other resources. Missouri Digital Heritage. The link is in your handout. The handout link is in the little chat box. And they were one of the early ones to do this kind of statewide database. And it's part of their Secretary of State's office. And basically, it would have been around the 2007, 2008, I think, in that kind of crash of finances. The Secretary of State at that time decided, you know what? I'm going to keep all my local clerks of court busy digitizing all of this stuff. And I am going to then get this online so that my clerks of court can actually focus on their actual duties instead of looking up all of these certificates for all of these genealogists. So again, this will show up if you do Missouri vital records, this will show up. So look at the results you're getting on Google, find out what is available. When in doubt, contact a librarian in one of the genealogy centers in the state, preferably near where you're researching and your ancestors were, and ask some general questions about research, where resources in a time period might be located. And they will point you to the right places. West Virginia also has a similar site through their, oh gracious, it's something in cultural affairs or something. So again, every state calls these things different things. So FamilySearch.org also has a bunch of records. They partnered quite a few years ago with the state of Texas, and they have a lot of information on there. This particular collection is Texas deaths, 1890 to 1976. And again, I went into the catalog on Family Search, and I did a search for, I knew Texas was on there, so I did Texas and death as a keyword, and location Texas, United States, Texas, keyword death. And then in that I searched for Goad, which is a family name. I don't know that this Goad is particularly a relative or not a close relative anyway, but it is a somewhat unique surname. On this, you'll see they have some things indexed, so you could do a name search for this, turns out to be a child. And if you have the opportunity to actually look at a document, it's really helpful if you do that, because unexpectedly I found for this 5-year-old child, he died of a gunshot wound at a neighbor's house, accidental death. Oops. Not quite what I was expecting. So read the actual document, look at it. They're often going to be messy, often going to have really bad handwriting, bad typing, typewriter ribbons that have gone bad, lots of different things, you know, typed on top of the lines instead of in the spaces. But do your best to figure out what the record is saying, because those little clues can really help. Why do we want to look for vital records? What do these add to our genealogy endeavors? How much do they cost? The information they provide is invaluable because it is the confirmation of your ancestor or your relative, your cousin, whoever you're researching, in the legal record with the official dates of life events. And I have official in quotation marks there because death certificates are only as good as the informant. They may not know how old that person is. The decedent may have been fudging a little bit on how old they are, either older or younger, depending on their nature and why they were fudging. You see that in the census as well. Somebody marries a much younger or older spouse, and all of a sudden the ages start doing this over time and instead of staying there. So it just depends. Often you can find parents' names. This is one of the great things about many vital records. Parents' names are almost always on the birth certificate. Mama's name is there. Now, on some adoptive birth certificates, the original birth certificate may be absolutely fiction. I've heard many stories about that, where the young unwed mother was sent off to some home for unwed mothers, and they made up a fictional identity in order to protect her. She may have lied or may not have told who the father was, So you may find fictive birth parents. This is where DNA is bringing out some very interesting things with birth parents at various generations. Now, parents' names are usually asked for on the death certificate. Sometimes it's unknown because, again, the informant doesn't always know. And then sometimes, and it depends on the location and the time frame of the marriage certificate. Sometimes they will ask for the name of the parents and where the parents were from, and sometimes they don't. So some time periods in some states, you get full birth information, any previous marriages on the people getting married, and you get all 4 parents' names and birthplaces. It's fabulous. And then sometimes they don't ask the question or don't require them to answer that question. One of the frustrations with some death certificates is some death certificates will name the spouse and some will not. Sometimes they will name everything except for her name. So you might get a maiden name, but you might not have her first name because she's Mrs. J.T. Moore. I don't know. So it just depends. The other thing that this does, well, at least birth and death, can often indicate where someone lived. Marriage as well, but people may have traveled to another state that had better or less restrictive marriage laws. People eloped, even when there wasn't a particular reason to elope, except for they just didn't want to stand up in front of people and have people look at them. My great uncle, we have like 2 bad pictures of him. It's sad. He just was very shy and he didn't want to be the center of attention. So you may have confirmation of locations where they lived. You may find death certificate. That John Rouse's son died in 1915 in North Carolina, lived in South Carolina, but he had tuberculosis. He was at the sanatorium in Southern Pines, one of the many sanatoriums in Southern Pines. And so you may find that the hospital was in the next state just because you happen to be in a border county. Here in Spartanburg County, we find people coming from Rutherford County down to Spartanburg County. We find people going back up to North Carolina to have a baby at mom's or grandma's house. So that county line, which is the state line, sometimes you have to think a little bit beyond the borders that you might assume. Costs of vital records. Typically, they're going to run between $12 and $34 per record. If you're getting multiple copies of something, it may be $12 for the first one and $3 each for the next 3 copies or whatever. But you'll find that information on the Vital Records website. I have seen costs as high as $85 for a vital record. I want to say that was Wisconsin. New York's are high, New Jersey's are 60, 70 bucks, and a 9 to 12 week timeline in normal times. So right now they are running way behind due to all reports that I have seen. So it's going to vary. So especially in the states that they have much higher costs, you may want to check around and see if you can find other alternatives before you just pay that much money for a certificate that may or may not tell you what you need to know. In all of the cases, you will have to send a copy of your identification, and you may have to prove the relationship to the person. To get my grandmother's birth certificate from the state of Virginia a couple of years ago, as a grandchild, I was not an authorized person who could do that until I sent information in and proved, it was a multiple page letter. I had to prove that she was dead, her spouse was dead, her parents were dead, her siblings were dead, and her child was dead. and that my brother and I were the only living heirs. And I just stated that he was okay with me getting the certificate. So luckily for that $12 certificate, I did a lot of work. I did not send copies of all of those certificates in because all but one of those certificates was in Virginia, and I was not paying them to get the certificates. I mean, it was just one of those things. But I provided death dates and locations and things that they were able to confirm that I really was who I said I was. Had to send my birth certificate in that connected me to Dad, and Dad's in to connect him to his mother. And the one person I couldn't get a death certificate for was Great Uncle Edward, who died in Atlanta, Georgia. Georgia has a 75-year restriction on death certificates. As a great niece, I don't qualify to get that death certificate. I know when he died. I know where he died. Stated that in my letter, and they decided I had done enough to prove. So you may run into these problems. Sometimes it takes a phone call and polite working your way through with someone on the phone to find out exactly what you need to do to prove that you are eligible for said certificate or not. So some of these places to check before you order straight from the Department of Vital Records in whatever state it is. Do check the local library resources you may find, like in South Carolina. We'll send you a copy of something off the microfilm for $5 for the state death certificates that we have on microfilm. And heck, right now we're mostly waiving that fee as long as people don't take too much of advantage of it. Do check Ancestry, Ancestry Library Edition, Family Search, the big databases. It's good to do a cursory check through there just to make sure something's not obvious. Do check for the state and county websites. You may find that the county that you're looking at has a marriage index on their county website, unrelated to the state's stuff. You may find South Spartanburg County, South Carolina, which has pretty much nothing. So it just depends on the county, but sometimes you luck out and sometimes it makes it so much easier for everything that you need. Do check with state archives or libraries. In South Carolina, it is the Department of Archives and History, and that does most of the genealogy and is the repository for state records. In Virginia, it's the Library of Virginia that is the official repository of state records. There is well, it used to be called the Virginia Historical Society. It is now, I can't remember what they renamed themselves. It's another name, but it's over on Boulevard. But they are independent of the state. They're a private foundation. Library of Virginia is the official repository of records. So a little bit of Google search will help you find that. Ask a librarian and say, this is what I'm looking for. Can you tell me where it is? If you can't find it in an easy Google search. You may find that a US Gen website or the state or local county affiliate of the US Gen Web site may be helpful. There are other volunteer genealogy sites, Facebook pages, various groups. If you get into a group for a local area and ask the question, somebody can point you toward where you need to be looking. Some general resources besides online. There are plenty of how-to books for genealogy. We have many at the 929.1 call number in our Kennedy Room collection, as well as circulating that you can check out from the library. I would recommend doing a catalog search for those because they may not be at the branch you normally use. So I would check. You can put them on hold and they'll send them to your preferred branch, except for Inman right now. Inman's under construction, but the other branches are active. There is a book called The Red Book. We have a copy. It's the only copy in the system. for American state, county, and town sources. Ancestry put that out a number of years ago. It is no longer in print form, except for those of us who have the older editions. That content is now online in the Ancestry.com learning area, which is not particularly intuitive, in my opinion, but it's there. Also, FamilySearch.org has their wiki, which is fabulous, and it will tell you where to find stuff, how to find stuff, whether you have to pay for it, that kind of thing. So that is an easier to use resource than the Ancestry one. They're also researching the state's guides from the National Genealogical Society for many states. I think they're up to 25 or 6 states now. And there are other state guides put out by different groups, such as the Daughters of the American Revolution and state genealogical societies, among others. And so you may be able to find specific information for a particular location. New York Biographical and Genealogical Society, and I may have gotten that backwards, it may be the New York Genealogical and Biographical Society, New York G&B, B&G, those initials. They have a fabulous, like 500-page book of resources for New York, and it goes through county by county what the resources are, where to contact, who to talk to. And so if you're looking at New York, that would be a book to get your hands on. So it just depends state by state. And so asking questions of local genealogy people too. So happy researching. And before I unmute everybody, I am going to hit, if I can figure it out, stop recording.